Thank you very, very much for joining us. Welcome to India, and a very powerful speech is what you made at the Economic Times Global Business Summit. But I want to go back to some of what you said, and you said terrorism or security is the biggest threat to globalization. I'm going to take globalization out of the picture right now.
Okay.
What, according to you, is the biggest threat that the world that we live in faces at this moment?
Well, from the standpoint of the United States and standpoint of what we need to do to be able to deal with that, is that there are several. It's not just one. Terrorism, significant problem. 9/11, 3,000 Americans dead, worse than Pearl Harbor. Nuclear proliferation, clearly a major problem in the Middle East and elsewhere. The shift in Russia. You know, we all got used to Gorbachev and Glasnost and Perestroika and 20 years of relative cooperation, the end of the Cold War, the breakup of the old Soviet Union. But now we have Putin, and Putin is far more aggressive. He has, I think, designs on the Baltics. We've already seen him take Crimea and part of Ukraine. He is modernizing his strategic forces. He's gotten re-engaged now in the Middle East. Sadat kicked the Russians out of Egypt in 1973. They hadn't played a significant role in that part of the world since. Putin's now back in Syria in a big way. I think he has aspirations to try to weaken and undermine NATO. That's a significant set of problems all by itself. Iran. You know, so my point is there are 4 or 5 significant emerging threats out there. In some cases, it's between superpowers, but in some cases, it involves non-state actors with respect to terrorism. And it's that combination of things that I worry about. There are other aspects to it. The fact that since World War II, the United States has had technical preeminence in all of the militarily significant technologies. That's changing rapidly.
That's right.
There are brand new technologies coming out now that have military significance. Cyber warfare. And so, you know, when you look at the broad spectrum of problems that we have to deal with, the size of militaries and their capabilities, cyber warfare, etc., the world's a much more complex, but I think also a much more dangerous place than was true 20 years ago.
I was going to ask you that. Is this the most dangerous that the world has been? And how adept are U.S. and its allies to face the threats that you spoke about?
Well, I said in my remarks yesterday, I believe, that I think, in my view, I'm speaking not for anybody, I'm a private citizen, but I think it's the most complex and challenging set of threats since World War II. It's a long time, 70 years. And I think in terms of our capacity to deal with it, we have, because of our domestic political situation, because of the policies in part of the Obama administration, in part because of the budget debate, for example, and part of this was the fault of the Congress. We now have something called the Budget Control Act adopted in 2011. It provides for sequestration. What's happened for a number of years is because of the Congress's inability to agree on a budget, we end up with across-the-board percentage reductions. The Defense Department, which takes up about 17% of the budget, takes 50% of the cuts. And this has been going on now for 5 or 6 years. And the net result of that is we have significantly diminished military capacity that badly needs to be corrected, and it can't be done in 1 year. Just last week, we had the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs before the Senate Subcommittee on Appropriations for Defense talking about exactly how difficult the current situation is.
But given the threats that you spoke about, and given the fact that you say that the military has been considerably weakened under the previous administration, do you believe the Trump administration is going to pump in the money that's required, not just to modernize military, but perhaps to get it to pre-Obama levels?
Well, the question from the standpoint of the last election was who would be better at dealing with that, and Trump was clearly committed to trying to rebuild the military, as contrasted with Hillary Clinton, who supported the Obama policies. And I think the situation is that it's going to take, it's a difficult thing to do, and the battle will be significant, from a congressional and a legislative standpoint. The process has already started. The administration said they want to increase defense spending by $54 billion. That would be an add-on to the proposed 2018 budget that's pending. That's not nearly enough in the minds of John McCain, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, or Mac Thornberry, who's chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. Most of us believe, and from my perspective, that we need to have a commitment, a long-term commitment that runs over several years in order to get back to the levels that are required given the current threat situation.
You spoke about the preeminence of United States at one point in time, and now you're talking about the rise of Putin or China being very aggressive in the South China Sea, or you yesterday spoke about North Korea. Do you believe the threat to the US has moved away from Islamic fundamentalism to some of what you just spoke about?
It's not an either-or situation. You can have both at the same time. That is to say, you can have a situation where Russia is now more aggressive than they were 15, 20 years ago when the Cold War ended, where China has gotten more aggressive in the South China Sea, and where the threat of Islamic terrorism is greater than it's ever been. And that can all happen at once, and that's what's happening. That's all. Those threats, 4 or 5 of them that I talked about yesterday, are all prominent threats today. It's not just one at a time. It's not either or. They're all there today.
But do you believe people in power and people in administration recognize those threats?
I think in the United States that there's a great deal of work that needs to be done to get the nation focused once again on national security. We've got so many other issues we've had in the debates and the presidential campaign of last year and so forth. It's really a subject that has not been significantly addressed the way it needs to be. There are relatively few of us who are speaking as I am today and who perceive that as what ought to be our number one priority. Part of that's I've always been strong on national defense, but I was Secretary of Defense 25 years ago. I was there in the bunker on 9/11. My own background and experience leads me to focus on those things, but I also think it's clear that from the standpoint of the public, they at this point are more focused on domestic issues. Standpoint of most of our politicians, they're more focused on domestic issues as well.
I'm going to just turn the focus and talk to you about Mr. Putin, because you say that Russia's meddling in US elections is perhaps an act of terror. You've chosen to call it that, and it's of course got big...
I think I said in some quarters
That's right.
It would be viewed as an act of war.
Yes, an act of war, an act of war. What is it that the US can do to retaliate? Does the US need to retaliate? Because it increasingly looks at Mr. Putin, who's taking the pole position in the world, which once belonged to the US president.
Well, I would disagree. We don't care so much about his prominence. I mentioned that as one of a long list of things to show that Russia today under Putin is a very different figure than 20, 25 years ago, 1991, when the Berlin Wall had come down in '89, the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union went out of business at the end of '91, and Germany was reunified, Eastern Europe was liberated, very, very different set of circumstances. And now with Putin, we see irrefutable evidence that he's trying to reverse that process. And we see it in terms of what he's done with Crimea and Ukraine. We see it in terms of what's happening with respect to the way he's dealing with the Baltics, and as I say, I firmly believe he's trying to do everything he can to undermine NATO.
I'm going to quickly speak to you about the Trump administration and the kind of rhetoric that one has seen, whether it's ban on citizens from some Muslim-dominated countries, or the kind of rhetoric that one has seen. Do you believe that's also precipitating the threats that exist in the world already? Is this also going to push people to a corner and say, we must and we will retaliate?
There was no Trump, there was no rhetoric before 9/11. We were struck by Al-Qaeda, by Islamic extremists, killing 3,000 of our people. Worse than Pearl Harbor. The threat is already out there, and you can't, I don't think you can make a case that because Donald Trump uses strong language sometimes, that's why the terrorists want to kill Americans. I just think that's faulty thinking.
When you say that what terrorists will do today is very different from what they did in 9/11 or past acts of terror, whether it's moving beyond air tickets and taking control of cockpits. What are you scared about? What do you fear? Is this going to be an all-new warfare that the world hasn't seen, doesn't know the means?
I think we need to be on guard all the time with respect to the possibility of attacks launched by terrorists. Something happened. Again, I don't have access to classified information, but I was getting ready to come on this trip, flying from Washington to Dubai and then on to Delhi. One of the things that I was told was I would not be able to get on the plane going back to the United States carrying my iPad that I work on all the time. I live with that. You do, everybody else does. I have to check it in my luggage. I cannot carry it on board the aircraft. I think that's the warning as a result of some intelligence. I'm speculating now, as a result of intelligence that came to the attention of the authorities, and we're now taking an extra step to have to deal with that sort of thing. But I think the dangers are very real. They haven't gone away, and there's a tendency for us to sort of get into the mode of well, it was a one-off affair and it won't happen again. I don't believe that. You've had a terrible problem here, obviously, in India and in Mumbai. We've just seen it in the UK in the last week.
That's right.
So it's a problem. I think it will continue. I think it will grow worse. The thing I worry about more than anything else is when a terrorist organization were to get their hands on a deadlier technology than what's been used up till now. When you had Libya building nuclear material, they had centrifuges, they had uranium feedstock, they had a weapons design they'd acquired from Mr. A.Q. Khan to put together the Pakistani program. Now, they gave that up when we invaded Iraq and took down Saddam Hussein because they were fearful they were next. So it was given to us. If that hadn't happened, if it had still been there when Gaddafi was overthrown, then very real possibility at that point that ISIS or some of the more extreme elements in Libya would today have their hands on that technology. So it's the issues are related and tied together, and I think it would be foolish for us not to operate on the basis that there would be other attacks.
Because these issues are so interlinked, I think I must ask you the question on globalization. A lot of people believe is globalization in retreat. Is it fashionable today to say that the world is increasingly turning protectionist? I want to ask you a question. You've been a policy maker for decades. Do you believe that's a natural consequence of what we are seeing? Because there are these security threats that the world is battling with, the easiest thing to do is look inwards, be protectionist, perhaps shun away globalization. Is that a price that globalization is paying?
Well, globalization, to the extent that it means, I think the way it's interpreted at this conference, certainly, with respect to expanding economies, more trade, more access to markets, I think those are all positive things. I think the United States and most of the free world has benefited significantly from what's happened with respect to the global economy. At the same time, the technology that's enabled that has also become available to people who want to use it for illicit purposes. All of a sudden, cyber warfare emerges.
That's right.
As a technology that we have to be concerned about, that has economic consequences when people steal trade secrets, for example, for their economy, or when it's used communications on the part of an al-Qaeda terrorist organization trying to attract would-be terrorists from Europe to Syria. I mean, all kinds of applications as a result of that. So the things are related in terms of developments going forward, but I don't want to get into a situation where globalization has caused this or globalization will end because of these developments. I don't think that's true at all. We're going to see these trends, these developments go forward probably simultaneously.
The reason why I asked you that question, sir, is because if you look at Britain, which has already triggered a Brexit, or if you look at the US and President Trump talking about Make in America, which is good, he wants to create jobs there, but it's in complete opposition to what America has seen so far, because global supply chains are a reality. A car is never really made in one country, it gets assembled, parts come from different countries. But he's trying to undo all of that, and which is why I asked that question. Is globalization under threat in that sense? Will we see global supply chains being disrupted?
I don't think so. I think he has expressed the view that in some of the past negotiations by previous administrations, he believes the United States didn't get as good a deal as they should have gotten, and that as a result of that, our economy has suffered to some extent. He clearly feels strongly about American companies that relocate overseas, hire cheaper labor, and then import that product, whatever it is, cars in Mexico, back into the United States. And he's intervened in some of those transactions, made it clear that he wants them to build that new factory in the United States instead of elsewhere. At this stage, I don't see that as fundamentally undermining the whole proposition. We'll see as we go forward. I don't think, if you look at the United States and all that we benefit in terms of our access to markets and the access of others to our markets, it's very clear that we benefit long term from those developments.
Do you believe this kind of a rhetoric, or the pace, or the intensity of this rhetoric to continue? Because many people also believe that this is perhaps the first time where big business or big corporates have so much influence on policy making, and won't those finally be calling the shots, which will be anti what we are hearing right now?
Well, I guess I think you need to be careful not to overemphasize it. We'll see what develops. It's still the early days of the administration, and we're just in the process now of talking about major tax legislation. That will have a big impact. The tax issues are bound to have an impact in terms of those kinds of questions. And one of the things that Trump says he wants to do, and I think he means it, is to reduce our corporate tax rate, which is one of the highest in the world, and to make it more attractive for American firms to stay home and do their business there, or to repatriate earnings that they've got overseas. So there'll be things like that that will affect the rules of the game, so to speak. But I would not think, and we're not headed for Smoot-Hawley.
If I may just move to India for a bit, and considering Mr. Modi had a great relationship with President Obama, and there was a considerable bonhomie there, what are the areas of partnership that India and US can explore under the new administration? And more importantly, H-1B visas or immigration issues have been a big point of, or visa issues have been a big point of concern for some of our big corporates. What's the way forward? Do you believe this is a rhetoric that will die down? This is a rhetoric that's going to be taken care of because of the talent crunch that perhaps exists in the US, or is this for real and people need to brace up for new business models?
There's a very, very strong lobby for the H-1B program in the United States on the part of corporate executives who benefited from it. And I think we can make a very clear case that we ought to expand the program, that it is vital to our economic success going forward. One of the things I believe that's happened in the past is we've had in recent years a debate about a new piece of legislation on immigration, is that the advocates of getting legislation passed have wanted to tie it to an expansion of the H-1B program legislatively. And so that the advocates of reforming the immigration program use that as a lever, if you will. It hasn't passed up to this point, partly because we haven't gotten a bill yet that could be agreed to with respect to the total immigration set of issues. So it'll still be around a debate, but I think the lobby is very, very strong on H-1B visas, and I wouldn't be at all surprised by what it will. I think it's strong enough that the administration will have to pay attention to it.
US Federal Reserve, rate hike cycle started, 1 year left for Janet Yellen. So I'm going to ask you two quick questions. Do you believe the Fed has been behind in hiking rates? Because their target is 3%, they're just at 1% right now, despite a 1.5-year cycle of rate hikes. And B, how much of political weight will will the Trump administration carry in the appointment of the next Fed Reserve chief? Janet Yellen has a year going for her now.
Well, on the first question, I should ask my friend Marty Feldstein. He can answer that.
Shortly.
I don't believe I think the Fed has been doing about as well as that can be expected. I was a big fan of Alan Greenspan. He was a close friend, and that's how I think of the Fed. Secondly, with respect to your second question, what was it?
This was about Janet Yellen's
tenure. How it's yes. The president will nominate Fed chairman. has to go up for confirmation. But and when I worked as vice president, I was part of a panel that interviewed candidates for that job and then made recommendations to the president. But so President Trump will play a significant role in saluting, and choosing who will be the next chairman of the Fed.
And politics will have a big role to play there.
Well, it's usually not a Republican-Democrat kind of thing. It's you're looking for somebody who's got the professional credentials to be able to manage the Federal Reserve System, and that usually ends up with somebody who's been very successful in the economic field.
On that note, sir, thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thanks very much.
You bet.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.